annual basis, we kind of do a global survey to our members, like these gentlemen here, and get their feedback. And what I'll do is I'll just quickly go through some of these. So we call it our media consumption study. And let me just have a quick look here. So purchasing is done in teams, usually of 4+ members. That's been kind of mentioned before. White papers and case studies remain the most popular. If you want these slides, we can share these with you so you can take time to look through them in more detail. Significant content consumption happens before speaking with the vendor. Vendor calls simply are not consultative enough, and we can dive into that in a bit more detail with the panel. I like this quote: vendor-initiated approaches are diminishing in relevance. Cold calling, spam emailing, etc. are not effective given the volume of email and advertising seen. Too many of these contacts are made with no context and as a poor attempt of sales. Quite damning, really, isn't it? Vendor calls need to be more personalized, and that's that. So first of all, I'd like to go to Rob Roberts. Now, Rob, you're a member of various sites that we have at TechTarget, and just up here, I've got a little snapshot of some of the research that you've done with us over the last 12 months before you.
It's kind of scary, really.
Right. Okay. So. To kind of make it more real and to make it less scary, let's just talk about the projects that you've done that relate to some of this content that you've consumed here. So I know that you mentioned that you had a cloud migration project,
Yep.
And you'll see some of the relevant content that you've been consuming here. But also there was an ERP project that I know that you did at your. At the RACP, and you actually filled out a purchase intent survey that we send out to our members periodically, and you detailed a purchase for ERP, and I think you kind of talked about some of the related modules that were there. And so if I could ask you some questions about that particular project, I think that would be really interesting to
Sure.
kind of put some meat on the bones of this intent data that we've all been talking about. So the first question is, in terms of this ERP project, who or what established the need for it?
Okay, so that would be me. When I joined the organisation, one of the first things I was asked to look at were the projects that the organisation was committed to and how that related to its technology stack and the development path that should be gone through. Now, a relatively small organisation of about 350 employees, but looking after 25,000 members. People were frustrated with the manual way of doing basic tasks. How do we manage employees? How do we get month-end reports quicker? Took 15 days to get a month-end report, which is ridiculous. And how do we enable self-service? How do we become an agile organisation, which always brings a smile to my face when I talk about that. That's being agile. But the trajectory that I painted for that organisation was a need to focus on some of its core underlying systems before any visible improvement was seen for customer-facing services, which was the last thing that the organisation wanted to hear, but actually the thing they needed to do. So ERP became the obvious thing. The finance system they were using was a Microsoft, old Microsoft product called Great Plains, which was not really possible to do anything great with that. It's not that it was particularly bad, it just wasn't good at anything really.
Okay, so going back to that sort of research phase of the project, how many people were in your team, and could you kind of talk a little bit about the roles that they had in terms of research? And I know that a lot of you guys use analysts, but let's kind of keep away from that and kind of just focus on well, first let's talk about the teams, and then maybe some of the research materials that those people find useful.
So 350 people in the organisation wanted a say in the technology that we were going to invest in, everybody's interested, right? Which is great, but not practically possible. Firstly, I had a coordinating group, which was a design authority group that I set up. So I appointed somebody who was working directly with me as a design manager for the organisation. They were not tech background either, but they had come out of consultancy, spent some time at Accenture, for example, so knew about that particular world. We focused very much on the business architecture for the organisation. Therefore, what are the capabilities that we need, and how can technology be leveraged to support those capabilities? And we got a reference group of employees of about 10 people across the organisation who were actively involved in deciding what those capabilities needed to look at, and what their fundamental technology aspects needed to be too.
Okay.
In terms of who was in the marketplace, so you've seen some of my research. I know how to Google, right? So I don't know much, but I know how to Google. I talked to people I trust. So I have worked with a number of different consultancies, KPMG, Deloitte, and PwC over time. And I've talked to them about what they've seen work well.
Okay, and going back to the project again, you've got, in the survey we've got there, you've got the vendors being considered, okay?
Yeah.
You've got Microsoft, NetSuite, and Oracle.
Yeah.
So, were there any materials in particular that any of those vendors sent you that helped you to make a decision? And what was this decision? Who did you go for in the end, and can you tell us a bit
I'll
about
come
that?
back round to that one, if
Okay.
that's okay.
Yeah.
So Microsoft was incumbent, so we included them. We looked at what Oracle did, and Oracle reached out. In fact, Oracle recently have been reaching out to me significantly, despite the fact that I left that organisation 4 weeks ago, about how they can help us, which is like about 6 months too late in that particular cycle. And we talked to a customer of NetSuite and talked then to a vendor who might be able to support us in the implementation. The eventual decision was made, heavily influenced by the CFO, and it was to go with Microsoft Dynamics GP upgrade, which was against my recommendation. Now, anybody who understands the Microsoft Dynamics suite of products will know that they're not related. The GP is not related to, and I've forgotten actually what all the different ones are, but they're actually completely different products. Our prime focus when we went with the ERP was a financial management module, but with an ability to implement human capital management, to implement electronic procurement, to implement a range of self-service options for managers. And we knew we couldn't do that through Dynamics GP. We needed something different. Hence suggesting something completely different rather than doing, as the eventual decision was, a tactical upgrade for Dynamics GP.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for taking us through, some really interesting points there. And I think if we go to Ian now, so Ian Gibson, CIO of SuperChoice Services. Now, I would categorise Ian as an absolute voracious reader of content on our websites. Some people, some CIOs, we see a small amount of research, but Ian really, obviously you like to consume data both for project purposes, but also for your own education as well, don't you? Yeah. And if we look here, there's a lot of kind of cloud topics. This was from last year, and Ian, I know that you had a big you did a cloud migration project, and you had a deadline that was set by the government. Can you kind of talk us through a little bit about that project?
Yeah, so just to again set some context, we're a small organisation. We're 90 people. There's about 60 in technology though, so it's reasonably technically orientated. We work in superannuation, which is the third best performing market in the world, so we get good credibility out of that. And we cover sort of like 100,000 businesses, so we deal with about 100,000 businesses, which is about 2.5 million members. So we're the market leader in our segment, and that's important for us. So the project that we had was effectively to redesign our core platform. So we did that over a period of years. We redeveloped the technology stack. We're a Java shop. We went down a distributed microservices architecture. We redesigned the way we built that stack. And then the last bit of this was we migrated to the cloud. And we took a slightly different approach. So we're a multi-cloud strategy. So we locked in with a cloud management platform. And then what we do is that allows us to deploy to a vSphere cluster, Azure or AWS. But we can, when most people say multi-cloud, what they actually mean is they operate in different clouds that they try and knit together in some hodgepodge collection. Whereas what we mean by multi-cloud is I can take the same application and I can deploy it into a vSphere cluster, or I can deploy it into Azure, or I can deploy it into AWS, either one, and it will all work. And I can do that from scratch in just under an hour. So I am it's scary when you see the stats up there. I am sort of a voracious reader. And so for us, it was, those topics relate to all of those things that we do. But primarily the way we engage is we do use an analyst, so we always consult with them to give us a shortlist. I read a lot. We have a small architecture team of 3 people. They do some research. The decision making is fairly concentrated, and when you're a 60-person IT shop, even though I know that some people think that's not that small, we can't afford to maintain a whole lot of different technologies. So what we try and do is develop a few core relationships, and then we lock into those. We try not to spread our technology relationships around.
Great, okay. Now, in conjunction or because of this cloud project you had, one of the things that there was a project for cloud disaster recovery that you needed to do in tandem with that, and you filled out an IT purchase survey around the time of before you made that decision. Can you talk us through that cloud disaster recovery project purchase, and how you ended up choosing the vendor that you did?
Yeah, sure. So if you go into a multi-cloud environment, one of the ways, there are some cloud providers in this room, I think. It doesn't matter. I'm a fairly open guy, so it won't matter. One of the ways they'll lock you in is through the little things like if you take a backup in their environment, you can only restore it back into their environment. And so it sort of defeated the whole purpose of going with a cloud management platform and being able to switch between providers if the backups didn't really work. So, we were working with AWS at the time, so that must be the reason why I ticked Amazon on the survey form. But what we ended up doing was we ended up going with an open source product called Bacula. And we came up with a method where we could take backups in one environment and then we could restore them into another environment. And it sort of all worked automatically. So the way we did that, we just put someone onto the project who was part of the cloud migration team. He did the research. We bounced it off the analyst. So we used Forrester. I'll just mention their name once, but that's who we use. We did the research here, but most of the research in this particular area we didn't find particularly useful because not many people were trying to do what we were doing. When people talk about DR in the cloud, usually they're talking about how do I take a backup from some on-premise or physical site and store it into the cloud so that I can use it another day. They're not talking about sort of what we were trying to do. And then it was just a question of we tried some pilots and then we worked it through.
Okay. Now, I know from speaking to you before that you've also worked at a really big national bank. in Australia. What would you say, because you've said that your IT team's fairly small compared to a sizable organisation like that. What are the main differences when you're researching a project at a smaller company to one of those kind of big global companies?
I mean, when you're, so I was at National Australia Bank. It's pretty easy to find out. Just look at my LinkedIn profile. There it's this devolved decision making. So if you want to buy anything, you go to the architects and you just say, what should I buy? And they'll tell you. They have an opinion. I've never found an architect that didn't have an opinion. And the other thing is, I think IT is the last bastion of religious wars, because they will fight tooth and nail over their preferred solution. I don't care about religious wars. I do care about the technology, but I don't care about religious wars. So if they say this is the standard, and when you're at the NAB, and you're spending, like we were spending 40 million with Oracle a year, you can do lots of things that you can't do at a small firm. In a small firm, I would be directly involved in every decision. I would expect to meet with the vendors, and I would want to form a relationship with them where I think that there's a mutual give and take. As I explained to you, no one will get rich from us, not directly anyway. Hopefully indirectly. Hopefully we can be a good reference for you, and that'll let you sell to other people and make lots of money. But we want you to be successful, but we want you to work with us. We know there's going to be problems, so part of it is around feeling that when we have issues that you'll be able to work with us. We don't have a lot of money, so we tend to want to have flexible pricing and terms, so we'll trade that off. But yeah, that's the main process that we go through. It is very relationship orientated. We do rely a lot on. We do two things. We tend to try and consolidate with a small number of vendors and work with them. And the other thing we do is, my preference is actually not to go to trade shows or conferences. My preference is rather to go to breakfasts or lunches. You'll notice there's a theme there. They all involve food or drinking. But for me, it's and they're more personable. It's not the hard sell that you get at a conference. And the other thing is, oftentimes I get as much, if not more, out of what the other participants say and talk, and I'm interested in talking to them. I think that's, if there's a criticism of some of our vendors, it would be they don't facilitate contacts with other of their clients as much as I would if I was them, because I think your other clients are your best sort of form of sales, But
can I just ask you? So on that point, with that logic, do you find case studies to be more useful content than some of the other content that you get sent by vendors?
Case studies are great, but also, so I'm analytically inclined, so stuff with numbers and charts and figures I find quite interesting and compelling. The only thing, I do, because I download heaps of these things, I do get lots of cold calls. Most of the time I have to try and explain to someone, I just thought it was an interesting topic. I'll be open with you if you manage to get through to me. I don't answer the phone very often. We don't have a particularly polished process for screening calls out, but it's sort of, if I don't answer the phone, that helps a lot. But, Tom and I talked before, the thing that I'd say I do find annoying is, like, if someone puts up on their thing, the changing role of the CIO, which sounds like a really interesting topic. I'm okay with the topic, but then you download it and they're trying to tell you about backup strategies or something, that's not the changing role of the CIO. And so, as a result of that, you've taught me now to look at who's, not only the title, but who produces the title. So now I start to look at, okay, if that's that sort of topic, and I see it's like, there are backup vendors in this room too, yeah. So like a backup vendor, then I'll look at it and say, well, do I really think a backup vendor's gonna be able to tell me about the changing role of the CIO? Probably not. But, you know, if it's like cybersecurity, defence, and it's Fortinet, then I'd probably, you know, download it because I know that's their sort of area.
Okay, great. So if you could pass the mic to Winston Benedict, who's CIO of Dentsu Aegis Network. So Winston, unfortunately, you're not a member of TechTarget. But just so you don't feel left out, I'm going to put up a slide of someone in your organisation who is. And this is the content that they've been consuming with us. He's based in Melbourne. I won't give you any more clues than that. But he.
I'll find him. I will find him.
But I know from our conversation before that, I mean, obviously there's a lot of business intelligence and analytics stuff that he's been researching, and I know that you have. You said that you have several projects ongoing in that area. So could you, I mean, in terms of BI and analytics, could you give us an idea of how many people would be involved in a research team for a solution in that area?
Well, first of all, I want to just say I'll ditto what these guys said, and I'll just reinforce one thing about the personal relationship. And don't underestimate the value of references. That's what I look at to my peer group more than anything else in the small personal things. To your question about the projects and the number of people involved. So just by way of background, our company's about 2,000 people here in Australia. We are a media agency. So everything he said earlier about the ability to find or collect data on our audiences and target those messages to the individuals are spot on. That's what we're supposed to do, and that's the big driver behind these data projects. Is basically these data projects are about pulling out the media performance data, relating that media performance data to some outcomes, relating it also to non-online data, and then tying it to specific audience and specific individuals to say, okay, what's meaningful and relevant to that person, so we better target those messages to that audience or that individual, so the stuff that we do send that our advertisers spend on actually is meaningful and resonates and actually creates a positive experience for the user. So that is a big driver behind all this stuff, and there's multiple initiatives across this. By way of history, Dentsu Aegis Network grew up by acquisitions, which we have about 23 different brands within our umbrella organization, which means I have at least 23 different people involved trying to come up with a better mousetrap around how do we target better with our data. So I have at least 23 people that I have as stakeholders to say, okay, what's the right data projects, what's the right data analysis, what's the right data analytics. Now, much to what Rob said is, okay, I have to call that down, and I shrink it down to a core chief data officer group as well as a chief data infrastructure group. So I kind of call it down to about 3 people core on the infrastructure side, but equally important is data sources, data providers, and those people. And that tends to be a little different based on the type of data, whether it's media performance, third-party providers, audience providers, or various digital performance providers. So it's about 3 people on each individual project.
Okay, great. And what kind of, the other guys have mentioned case studies as being, useful to them. What kind of materials that a vendor would send you would you think would be most use to you researching a project?
So again, just to not to repeat what these guys says, but case studies is a big thing I look at. But most importantly, case studies in the context of an actual business outcome. I'm not so keen on our product performed something that created a technical outcome. I don't care about technical outcomes. I care about business outcomes. So show me how this thing changed the CEO agenda of make the money, save the money, or keep them out of jail. You have to resonate around that. And that's everything I have with my CFO, CEO. Starts with this is how it's either going to save you money, make you money, or keep you out of jail. And then relate that to that level, relate to your stuff. So these are the levers that pulls to drive that. So that's what I look for in a case study, because again, I think we've kind of hit that one pretty hard. The other thing I look at is benchmarks. I want to know how your stuff performs against others' in the market and why yours is a differentiator against the other things. So stuff that, like the graphs and numbers and things like that do resonate, but you have to get me to a point to look at that by first presenting the compelling business case of why this case study is relevant, why it's important, and what your product does that makes it easy for me to explain to my CEO. And that's actually one topic I want to emphasize about the changing role as CIO. In my view, is the budget of technology has been dispersed much more to the businesses, and the businesses are driving much more decision. And frankly, I think that's the right thing, because you can't operate anymore in this in a world where the CFO doesn't know what their ERP system does. A COO can't operate without knowing what their manufacturing systems do. So therefore, they have to, or a CMO can't operate without knowing what their marketing ad tech does. And because of that, they have to be much more integrated into the technology decisions. And as such, the stuff I look for from vendors that are trying to position stuff is you got to also be able to speak to the CEO, the CFO, and the CMO, and not the tech speak, right? Those guys are equal players, if not a growing part of all decisions. And frankly, a CIO is really in a customer service business, and those are my customers. So I've got to support everything I do in the context of what they need to enable. So anything you guys present to me has to resonate with that.
Great. Okay. So, any questions, guys, for the CIOs? Anything you want to test out? Yeah.
Hi. I don't know if you report to a board or get asked to report to a board, but how do you find, how do they take your recommendation? Are you often asked to go to the board, and do they, how much influence do you have?
Well, I'm actually in the midst of, the answer is increasingly significant. Our industry, at least in my context, our industry is under a tremendous amount of disruption, and they are realizing increasingly, like I just talked about, that they can't do anything if they don't have the right technology underpinning it. And therefore, they can't operate and be dynamic and be creative, be agile, if they're still constrained by existing stuff. And a part of what I have to do is enable what their processes are. In order for me to enable those processes, I need those people to line up. Okay, you need to articulate and drive what your governance is around this process, and then I'll enable it. So I'm driving a lot of transformation just through the board. Although it's not a board in our company, but equivalent board, is to make sure that our stuff starts I push the agenda on how we evolve the business around this thing. And also increasingly security has become a real hot topic that's has everybody scared across the organization, which pulls me into the board. I don't know if you guys have anything.
Yeah, just to really pick up on what you were saying there, I think, so the executive team, before I took on the role, was actually on the executive team, and I said I'm not going to do that because it'll make me ineffective. On a committee, I tend to behave more like a terrorist than anything else. My background's transformation, and I think the role of a CIO is about talking about how you achieve transformation, or how you can leverage technology to achieve transformation, rather than it being about the technology, and why the selection of who you partner with, what products you're looking to bring in, how that goes to enable a particular capability within an organisation, that's the key point to focus in on.
Ian, you got anything to add to that?
We're a little bit unique. We're equity owned or privately owned. Our major owner's a technology entrepreneur. So my problem, I do present to the board on regular occasions. My issue is actually not getting time with the board, it's actually keeping away from them. I had 2 hours with our major shareholder yesterday wanting to grill me on stuff. One of the things we did was we migrated off Oracle to Postgres from our database technology. That was 3 board meetings I had to go to. He dislikes Oracle with a passion. But it was that emotional, thing of, Oracle's a safe choice, we should stay with it. And it was only in the end, the fact that I went there 3 times, that my CEO supported me, and I got him to agree that if I went out and got 2 of our largest clients to sign off that they were okay with this, that he reluctantly agreed. Notwithstanding the fact staying with Oracle was going to cost us several $1 million in licenses. So, I do report to the board quite regularly. It's because we're small. There's only 5 members. It's very engaging. They just walk around the building, so you can talk to them anytime. You know, so it's a little bit atypical in that respect.
Okay, well, I think that's all we've got time for, unfortunately. But guys, thanks so much for joining us and sharing your insight with the audience. And so if we can give the guys a round of applause. Thank you.